Bedtime from Abroad presents The Love of Fond from Irish Mythology, translated by Peter Beresford Ellis. Part 2. Loig took the chariot's reins and Cu Chulainn climbed in with his weapons, and they bade farewell to Emer. To the astonishment of the warriors of Uled, they drove to the water's edge and vanished. At the edge of the water of the great lake, Liban was waiting for them, and enveloped them in a cloud of mist, and took them over to the island and through the magic portal to Magmel. Lavred was there to greet them, standing tall with his sun-yellow hair tied at the back. There were hosts of fighting men, impatient for the contest. Cu Chulainn rode out in front of the army of Lavred, Loig guiding the chariot. "First we should scout out the enemy's forces," Loig advised, "for the advice of the charioteer is much to be respected." "I will go and do this task," Cu Chulainn told Lavred. "Stay here with your army, and when I need you, I shall raise a cry. Do not come before." Lavred was reluctant to let Cu Chulainn ride off with Loig, and with no other warriors to support him. However, he respected the champion's request. They moved forward and found the hills surrounding the pleasant plain filled with black tents of the enemies as far as the eye could see, and they saw the battalions of Shenach the Spectre, riding blood-red horses, moving into position. Beyond was a grey mist, through which came the moaning sounds of the demon host. Blood hung heavy on the air already. "Today the battle will be bloody," Cu Chulainn said to Loig. Now it happened that the Morrigan, the triune goddess of death and battles, was allied to the demon Shenach the Spectre. She sent her spirits, in the shape of 3 night-black ravens, to hover over Cu Chulainn and warn Shenach and his warriors of the caliber of the warrior who came against them. But Shenach's men laughed at the birds and their warning. "There is but a single warrior of Uled, a little human boy who comes forward with his charioteer to challenge our hosts. Is that all Lavred can send against us?" They roared with laughter and made no special defense. Cu Chulainn spent that evening scouting, and just before dawn he was ready for the battle. At that time, Yul went to bathe at a pool near his tent to prepare himself for battle. Cu Chulainn came on him and cast his spear, transfixing him where he knelt by the water. There was a great groan from his heart, so strong that it seemed to come from a whole army and not one man. In a rage, Yul's bodyguard rushed forward and tried to close with Cu Chulainn. A battle rage now rose in him. Those who saw it and survived, of whom there were very few, said that his whole appearance altered. One of his eyes closed up so that it could hardly be seen, while the other thrust forward wide and angry. From his brows a column of blood gushed forth, so that those it touched were scalded. His fury gave him the strength of 100 warriors. Within a minute, he had laid dead 33 of Yul's best champions. Shenach and Emer rallied their hosts and rushed forward to do battle. "Lu!" cried out Cu Chulainn, calling on the strength of his great immortal father. Demon warriors fell this way and that, until Shenach and Emer themselves were split asunder by the edge of his mighty blade. Hearing Cu Chulainn call on his father, the great god Lu of the Long Hand, Lavred urged his army to roll forward on the enemy host. There was a bloody battle, and soon the victory was in no doubt. Lavred was sick of the slaughter, and, as his enemies were surrendering, he called for a ceasefire. But Cu Chulainn, in his battle rage, continued in the slaughter. Loig left his master then and raced forward to Lavred. "It is his battle fury, which will not cease until he has fought himself out," he explained anxiously. "Let no man approach him, for it might be that he will turn on friend as well as foe." "What can we do to stop him?" demanded Lavred, "for I'm quite sick of senseless killing." "Get 3 large vats of ice-cold water." This they did. Then Laig asked for 2 young maidens to come forward and remove their clothes. On his instruction, they approached Cu Chulainn so that he was forced to drop his weapons before them. They led him to the first vat of ice-cold water and put him in it. It boiled over by contact with his blood heat. Then he was put in the second vat. It became hot, but it did not boil. Then he was put into the third vat, and, by this time, his blood had returned to normal and the battle rage had left him. Cu Chulainn emerged and was normal again. Lavred thanked him for defeating the enemy of the Pleasant Plain. "Now you may go to Fand as a token of your reward." Laig drove Cu Chulainn to the great palace in which he had seen Fand. Cu Chulainn was taken into a room to bathe and refresh and scent himself. Then he was brought into the presence of Fand, who was waiting for him. Cu Chulainn had never seen a woman so beautiful as Fand. Gone from his mind was Emer. Gone were Etna, Aoife, and Nave, and all the other mortal women that he had ever loved. He sat by her side while Liban sang songs in praise of him. Cu Chulainn, like a boy, grew boastful and juggled golden apples for Fand, and performed tricks with his swords and spears. Fand, who was lovesick for this handsome young man, looked on him with eyes that shone with admiration. She asked him to describe his combats and battles, and he was not loath to do so. She listened avidly at his feet. Finally, Fand dismissed her sister and her handmaidens, and she and Cu Chulainn slept together in a lover's embrace. Cu Chulainn stayed in the palace of Fand for a month of otherworld time, but, as the days passed, Cu Chulainn began to remember the mortal world of Uled. "Stay with me, for no one in the mortal world misses you. No time is passing there," Fand urged him. But Cu Chulainn began to remember more and more about the mortal world, and he became increasingly restless. "I must see my home in Dundalgan again," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I would see the speckled hall of the Crave Ryoga again." Fand became terrified that she would lose her lover to the mortal world again. "I must go and fight battles for my king," Cu Chulainn finally said, "for I am a hound trained for war, not a puppy to frolic at my mistress's feet." Now having said those words, the sad, accusing face of his wife Emer came into his mind's eye. When Fand saw that he could not be persuaded to stay with her, she realized he would have to return. She proposed that she would follow him to the mortal world, and, on each quarter moon, she would meet him on the strand of the yew tree's head. Cu Chulainn called Laig, and they bade farewell to the people of Magmel, the Pleasant Plain, and Liban brought them back to Uled, to the very spot on the lake shore. There was great joy at their return, which seemed hours rather than the month they had spent in the other world. Cu Chulainn told Emer all that had happened there, with the exception of his affair with Fand. Life returned to normal at Dundalgan, but on each quarter moon, Cu Chulainn would venture forth to the strand of the yew tree's head and meet with Fand. By the shadowy light, he and Fand made love on the sandy shore or amidst the strong oak trees, on carpets of sweet hay or on the leafy mattress of the forest floor. Fand had her magic bird sing songs so that Cu Chulainn felt himself in the comfort of her palace. Emer was a wise woman, as we have said before. She soon learnt that her husband was meeting a strange woman and making love with her. Emer was wise, but was also of flesh and blood. She found out where her husband's assassinations were taking place, and she gathered 50 of her handmaidens and armed each of them with a sharp dagger. Then she set out to kill Fand. At that moment, Fand lay with Cu Chulainn in a forest glade. Being of the other world, her senses were sharper than mortal ones, so she raised her head while Cu Chulainn lay sleeping. "Laig," she called to Cu Chulainn's faithful charioteer, who was acting as a sentinel for her companion nearby. "Beware, there is harm coming near here." Laig leapt up, his bow already strung. "What is it? I see and hear nothing." "I hear Emer and her handmaidens coming this way. They are armed with daggers and mean me harm." Laig hurried off into the forest to try to distract Emer. Cu Chulainn now roused himself from sleep, the sharpness of the exchange awakening him. He leapt up and started dressing, while Fand explained her fears. "Do not fear, Fand, but get into my chariot. Emer shall not harm you so long as I am here." Just then, Emer, with Laig trying to persuade her not to continue, burst into the clearing with her handmaidens behind her. "Put down your knife, Emer," Cu Chulainn told her quietly. "Put it down?" sneered Emer. "This I tell you, the sun will not rise tomorrow unless I have parted you from this woman." "I cannot fight with you," smiled Cu Chulainn sadly, "and I doubt if you will kill me in spite of your rage." "No, it matters not to me how I separate you." Fawn moved forward then. "You cannot love him if you would destroy him." "Rather would I destroy you." "Stand aside, Emer," Cu Chulainn now told her. "For though I also love you, I have sworn to defend Fand against the daggers of our mortal world. Do you seek to destroy me? Ironic that would be when I have survived so many combats to be destroyed by my own wife." Emer suddenly burst into tears. "You have shamed and dishonored me before the woman of Uled and before all the 5 kingdoms of Erin. What have I done to you that you so despise me and turned from me to a woman of the other world for comfort?" "Can I not love Fand as well as you? She is more beautiful than any mortal, intelligent and fair and worthy of a king in any land. There is nothing under the heavens that Fand would not do for me. Can I not love you as well? For you are both equal in your own worlds and in your own ways." Emer dried her eyes and laughed angrily. "Are you trying to justify your capriciousness? The unknown is always more exciting than the known, and this is why you think you love her. One day red seems ordinary and white is new. The next, it is red that is exciting and white is old. Men always worship what they can't have, and what they have seems worthless." Cu Chulainn stood helpless between Emer and Fand, and his face was sad. He suddenly realized that he loved both, but for different reasons. At once, wisdom claimed Emer's mind. She laid aside her knife and dismissed her handmaidens, making them take an oath never to tell what they had seen. "I do not want him if he comes to me by claim of my position as his wife or because of his guilt. He must come because of love." Fawn stepped forward and gazed into his eyes and then sighed deeply. She turned to Emer. "Have no fear, Emer, daughter of Forgal. You will leave me for you. It is right, for it is you that have the greater love." Fand blew softly on Cu Chulainn, and the warrior frowned and sat down with his back to a tree and fell asleep. "Now it is I who must go," Fand said softly, and tears were falling from her eyes. Emer gazed at her rival sadly. "I see you truly love him, Fand. If this is so, then I will stand aside. But there is nothing the spirit can wish, for that you cannot give." And with Emer standing aside, Fand realized just how much Emer loved Cu Chulainn. Then there was a soft sighing of the wind, and a great silver chariot appeared in the forest clearing. A tall, handsome young man alighted from it. He had a noble and gentle face, and he looked on them with sadness and understanding. "Oh, my husband!" cried Fand. "It is Mannanan, god of the oceans. You were once dearer to me than the world we shared. You forsook me and I sought love elsewhere. Once we shared our lives and passed them in an unending dream." Emer knelt before the radiant god who came and stood, looking down at Cu Chulainn. "He is a noble man, this son of Lu," he sighed. "You chose a noble love, Fand, but he is loved already." He turned back to Fand. "We shared the same love which Emer gives to her husband. I, like him, sought a new toy to play with. I have learned maturity. We could love again. Will you leave this land of mortals for the other world and the pleasures of the pleasant plain? Fond gazed at Cu Chulainn with such distress and pain as no mortal could suffer. I have done great harm here, she said to Emer. I do love him, but there is no one else to whom I would release him. By standing aside for me, I know you love him well. Fond, demanded Manannan, what is it that you will do? Will you come away with me or stay here until Cu Chulainn comes to you? Fond simply held out her hand to Manannan MacLear, and the great god of the ocean reached forward and helped her into his silver chariot. At that moment, Cu Chulainn awoke. What is it? He cried as he saw Fond riding off into the sky in the great silver chariot. Fond is returning to her husband, as you do not love her above all others, replied Emer bitterly, for there was dismay on his features at losing Fond. Cu Chulainn gave 3 great cries of grief, and, ignoring Emer and Laig, went running off along the seashore, gazing into the sea in which the silver chariot of the ocean god disappeared. They did not see Cu Chulainn in many a month, for he took himself to the mountains, living among the wild animals, scarcely eating nor drinking nor even sleeping. He dwelt on the plains of Luchra, and no one would go near him. Then Emer went to the court of Conovar at Evan and told the king what had happened. He still has his sickness on him, Emer said. I know, agreed Conovar, who loved Cu Chulainn as if he were his own son. I have sent my warriors to persuade him to come back to us several times, but he attacks and drives them off. Then send your best musicians. Let them sing to him and tell him of the heroic deeds that he once performed here. Let them sing to him about his companions in arms who miss him. Let them sing to him of his wife, Emer, daughter of Fergal, who once he loved and wooed and married. And King Conovar sent forth his best bards and poets, and, when Cu Chulainn was lulled into sleep, they brought him forth to Evan. Once there, Cafid the druid called upon Manannan and offered prayers, and the ocean god came forth and heard of the tragedy that had seared Cu Chulainn. Being a wise and mighty god, Manannan took his cloak of forgetfulness and shook it between Fond and Cu Chulainn, so that each forgot the other. And thus it was ensured that they would never again meet, in any time nor in any world. Then Cu Chulainn grew well and content with the mortal world again, and went back to dwell in Dún Zalgan with Emer. He had entirely forgotten about Fond. But Emer had not. She grew irritable and expressed anger on the slightest pretext. She recalled that her husband had once loved Fond to the extent that he could not choose between them, and that only the intervention of the ocean god, causing him to forget, made him content with his lot. Everywhere she went, especially walking in the woods and seeing strange birds, Emer was reminded of Fond. She became more bitter with each passing day. Cu Chulainn, lacking memory, could not understand her anger to him, and he grew ill, trying to recall how he could have offended her. Emer told Levarcham, the old nurse of Deirdre, who still dwelt at Conovar's palace. Levarcham told Conovar, and Conovar in turn told his druid Cafid. Cafid mixed a potion, and one evening when Conovar had invited both Cu Chulainn and Emer to a great feasting at Evan, the druid quietly slipped 3 drops of his potion in each of their goblets. They drank. Cu Chulainn and Emer were overcome with sleep and conducted to the guest's chamber, and, when they awoke, Cu Chulainn had no memory of his passions, but there lingered in him a deep sorrow, the reason for which he could not recall. And when Emer awoke, her anger and jealousies were gone, and once more she was her natural self, the sweetest and most loving of wives. The end.